Welcome to the Best Action category of the R Anime Awards. This category recognizes the most thrilling and exciting action anime of the year. The nominees have impressed us with their stunning animation, gripping storylines, and unforgettable characters. Let's dive into the nominees and see which anime stood out above the rest. Here are your nominees for Best Action of 2022.
Your jury winner for the Best Action Show 2022 is Chainsaw Man.
And your public winner is Chainsaw Man.
Joining me to talk about the Best Action shows and obviously Chainsaw Man is the AAA podcast. Hello.
Hello there. Thanks for
Hello.
having us.
Little information from their website. Traveling with AAA is a new podcast that inspires listeners to discover the joy and transformational value of travel. Oh wait, wrong podcast. This is
I don't think that was the correct one.
this is actually the Anime Addicts Anonymous podcast with Mason
Hello.
and Caroline.
Yo.
And joining us as well is the juror for action, Russix.
Hi,
Joining
hello,
us as
well. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Anyway, Tonikaku, Chainsaw Man isn't exactly a surprise winning this category, right? Even for very often the jury and the public disagree, and a lot of times people can call the jury like kind of snobbish. What is the appeal here that causes Chainsaw Man to kind of rise above the angst, as it will?
So, in my opinion, there's kind of three main tenets that make Chainsaw Man so fantastic at what it is. Obviously, for one thing, what I found interesting about the nominations in this category is that Chainsaw Man is the only quote-unquote first entry nomination in this series. Actually, it hasn't been a thing in any of the past awards. You always have a lot of sequels. I mean, you look at on the list, everything else is kind of based on knowing some previous material, whereas Chainsaw Man is kind of standalone in its entry point. Second of all, obviously it's been hyped for a very long time, but I think in a lot of ways, hype tends to make those expectations too high, but Chainsaw Man really rose to meet them, and for that to happen is a very rare occurrence and kind of surprised me in a good way. And finally, I think as good as the action was, it really had a lot of good, somber, more like daily life and introspection moments that allowed you to breathe, which made the action hit so much harder when it came back. And I think all those things combined really elevated Chainsaw Man to win both categories, as you can see.
I also think that the character lineup is very different from a lot of other nominations on this list. Like, it's not very often where you have a little shithead as your first protagonist, and then you got the shithead sidekick, and then you got the leader of the organization who's a complete psychopath in many ways, etc., etc. There's maybe one or two actually sane characters in Chainsaw Man, and you can exactly see the same for the rest of the nominations. For the most part, they have very likable main characters, while Denji is somewhat lovable, but he has his own little quirks.
Now, the people viewing the stream are probably going to hate me because I bring this up like every time Chainsaw Man is on screen. But there's kind of a sort of quote unquote controversy around its like kind of directing style. A lot of the
hmm
manga fans are disappointed with the fact that they went more for a live action, realistic kind of thing. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
So I've read the manga actually, and while I do like the insanity that it brings, and I feel like yes, the adaptation of Chainsaw Man lost a little bit of that edge, that sharpness, that visual intensity in being a little more dialed back and subdued. I think that it didn't take away the joy and moments that it did so well, and because it took a step back, it allowed to integrate a lot of other moments. You have the original scenes like Aki, preparing for his day with a somber cup of coffee and just taking a chill pill, and that really helped to give the anime a little more ebb and flow instead of being the high octane intensity that the manga persists. And because of where the manga goes, with how absurd and crazy and off the wall, there's still room for that ramp up to occur. Because it's not a full adaptation, there's still, I think we can still get to that craziness, and it will be even more striking than the kind of one note intensity that the manga pertained or persisted with. So I get the concerns, but it didn't take away the core and enjoyment that I got out of this series.
As someone who has not read the manga, I honestly had no idea what the controversy was about because
It's
I thought
probably
it
not
was
even a real
visually
controversy.
interesting. I didn't well, not really controversy, but, like, I did hear a couple people talk about, "Well, it's not like the manga," and I'm like, "I'm not entirely in what way?" But either way, I thought it was visually interesting enough to, make it enjoyable. The only thing is, for me, is that the animation style is a bit uncanny valley for me, I have to say. Not to say that I don't like it at all or that it's bad or anything, it's just a little off, and it makes me feel weird.
Now, Rustics, as Mason mentioned, this is the sole entry that's a brand new like iteration rather than being his equal. And to just the fact that it won out above all these things that have so much history and so much hype behind them, like freaking like Mob Psycho, the return of Bleach, Jujutsu Kaisen was kind of like a trailblazer last year. Exactly what elevated it above the other rankings for you guys?
So everything I would say is like we pretty much liked everything in the category. I would say is like every single entry had a lot of positives for us, all the way from first to eighth. The main things that really took Chainsaw to the top was like the more we talked about it, is like even if we brought up a negative, it was like immediately after we had found another positives. Like Mason brought up how the directing actually elevated some scenes. Like a good example would be Makima. Is like whether you're a source reader or not, is like the way they frame Makima is perfect. It's like you perfectly understand her character throughout the show, even if you know nothing about it. And and then all the action scenes are just are fantastic and amazing. And we just had a great time watching Chainsaw Man in general. And like the uncanny valley feeling, it's actually like kind of fitting in this case because like with it being grounded in a more realistic setting, when you see those devils show up, it makes more sense. It makes more sense that they don't feel natural to that world. It's like they just kind of pop up in this more realistic setting. You're like, oh wow, that they actually don't feel like they belong.
Yeah, it's so much harder.
So I was like, yeah, the directing style might not make it like the manga, but I honestly, it's like because I was a source reader. Is like I honestly think like it was a good example of taking a story and taking it to the medium it belongs in, and actually doing more than just what the source material gave it.
I mean, I can totally see that because there are definitely moments and scenes where I was watching in the anime. I was like, how would you even try to do this in the manga? Like that one, like the very first kind of semi climax with Makima, where you actually realize how much of a menace she can be. I mean, just the cinematography and the music and the uneasiness you get. I just don't think you could have replicated that in manga form. So it really is an example of using each medium to its fullest based on its different strengths, I think.
And the show has the intensity, it has the excitement, it has a galore of blood. But at its core, it doesn't lose sight of its humanity. It captures the mood, the humor, just the heartfelt moments beyond just the fights, which makes it so well-rounded.
And also, one other thing that the main discussion on this show on our Discord wasn't about the chainsaws or how hot power is. Okay, there was a fair amount of that actually. But one of the biggest discussions that we had around the show was Denji's character and his way of being, because we can understand that, he's a little bit, pervy, he wants to touch boobs and get kissed and have sex and that stuff. But the main thing that we can get over was the fact that, okay, so he's obviously a very mentally damaged person, based on the horrible childhood he had and the lack of affection he's ever had in his entire life. And we're like, wait a minute, this makes no sense for there to be pining for this sort of sensual attraction and mistaking for love what he's really wanting. And so we're going back and forth on this, and it really made for a very interesting discussion on his character.
And that's always what you look for in a show. Can you have these kind of interesting discussions that, on the surface level, it's like, man, like, I don't know, it's just crazy to think about how horny someone is can be like a actual like in-depth discussion point.
Yeah.
But it really happens.
Sorry,
go ahead.
No, speaking of someone who's also kind of like mentally damaged, maybe not damaged, but Mob Psycho has also aired, and it is our second place on the jury side and third for the public. But who doesn't like Mob Psycho? I kind of think we have an interesting opportunity here where, Caroline, you've read the manga, so you know what happens, but you haven't seen the third season. Is that correct?
Yeah, I kind of ran out of time. Well, I still am planning on watching it. It's just other things got pushed to the forefront, especially when we already know what happens. But I am still very excited to the finale of Mob Psycho and see all the great fights in that show, and also the emotional climaxes that come from it, and of course the fabulous animation and all that stuff that I love. Which is why my main disagreement is that I think it should be first place, even though I technically have not seen it.
So, my thought is that
I know Mason thinks differently. He doesn't like Mob Psycho as much as I do.
If there was one thing that would have won and dethroned Chainsaw Man, I was expecting it to be Mob Psycho, because not only did season 2 win this award back in 2019, but in the same way that Chainsaw Man was like an entry point, it's the only one that you could watch with no prior knowledge, Mob Psycho was the only one that got to a conclusion. Like, disregarding JoJo being kind of the end of a part with the end of part 6, Mob Psycho got to the end of the entire series. So there's inherently some satisfaction because people love an ending, and Mob Psycho absolutely delivered that. That said, while I did enjoy Mob Psycho season 3, I felt like it didn't quite reach out and grab the highs that the first 2 seasons had for me. I thought, while nice and heartfelt and delivering all of the quintessential mob moments and Reagan buffoonery that you look for, it just didn't quite connect quite as strong for me. So I appreciate it doing so well in both the jury and public results, but I am not as upset as Caroline that it didn't take the top spot.
Boo.
I mean, I'm gonna be honest. I feel quite the same
shall
way.
Rule all. I don't care.
Jury, defend me. Why did you guys not think it reigned supreme?
So you actually brought up a point that was brought up by a lot of the jurors while we were discussing it, because obviously being number 2, it was in contention for number 1 for a good portion of our discussions. It's like a lot of us came to the same conclusion, is we didn't feel like it measured quite up to seasons 1 and 2, and in this case we could only, like, yeah, it was the conclusion, it was bringing all those emotions in, but we couldn't just say, oh yeah, seasons 1 and 2 are great too, so let's make it number 1. Like, we had to say, it's like 3 just wasn't quite as good. It was still great, obviously, but it didn't, like you said, didn't reach those highs. And without spoiling anything, there was a certain sticking point some of us had with one of the ending scenes, that also kind of brought it below Chainsaw Man. Like I said, when we talked about Chainsaw Man, it was very hard to really sit there and dwell on negatives because we had so many positives. Whereas Mob Psycho had a very specific negative that for some of the jury towards the end. Not enough to ruin it, obviously, number 2, but it was enough to drag it just below Chainsaw Man for us.
The negative was that monkey shirt was just so ugly that you couldn't bear it.
No, that was just too fitting for Mob. That was actually great.
I mean, there are other negatives than towards the. I mean, I can think of like maybe a lot of people were complaining about the pacing, which Caroline you wouldn't know about because the pacing in the manga is probably okay.
I guess I don't.
They were thinking it dragged a little bit, and honestly, I don't know. Some of it is there. There's no like Reagan arc from season 2. That's like, ugh. Ugh.
Those middle episodes of season 2 that focus on Reagan were probably the best the series ever got to.
Yeah, that's the
I've been
problem.
waiting
There's
for
not enough
that.
Reagan. You have more Reagan.
It's like more Reagan is always better.
Reagan Psycho season 1. Let's make it happen.
Now, while Chainsaw Man and Mob Psycho are relatively high, relatively around the same area for both the jury and the public, Demon Slayer, their second, is kind of a wider gap. Demon Slayer is a freaking phenomenon. It's quote unquote beat out, Spirited Away or whatever, Mugen Train, yada yada yada. Why do you think this disconnect is here? What specifically? I'll have Rusix answer later. Specifically, what do you think the jury saw different from the public on this?
Ooh, that's tricky. I think,
and I hurt people's feelings.
Yeah, if I had to assume,
I think Mason and I are more aligned with the jury decision than we are with the public vote decision.
So the reason I personally didn't connect with Demon Slayer, similar to Mob, where I thought Demon Slayer was worse than season 1, but not in the sense that it failed to live up to the hype, but it felt so much of the same. It felt too much of a copy paste to really bring anything new to the table. Like, yes, it has some phenomenal, if you just look at the action scenes, Ufotable still has the flex, but really when the substance of something is uncertain, its form can't elevate it beyond that. And I think really a good way of presenting this is there was a lot of same body syndrome in Demon Slayer. A lot of the ladies in the show kind of had the exact identical bodies, almost to a creepy degree. And
that's true.
And I think that was just kind of emblematic of the indicator of homogeneity that ran through the series. Everything just felt very redundant and generic. Everything felt like you had seen it before and it had played out before, and it was bringing nothing new but phenomenal production values, which, fair, it had, and it hit with those moments. But I kept on watching it and being like, yes, it's impressive, but I've experienced this all before, and it wasn't bringing anything new for me.
And something for me in particular, I felt like the final battle took forever. It was just a battle that was segmented into so many pieces, and it just dragged for me. Like, it didn't, like, once you thought it was over, it wasn't over. And it wasn't over again. And I'm just like, it's not really flowing the way that I want it to. And then to top it all off, there was one moment at the end of an episode where basically everything just explodes. And I'm just left there with my mouth agape. I'm like, oh my God, that was epic and also just so sad. And so that's the end of the episode. But no, they have to have their little chibi forms pop up and do something really cute and very, like, tonally whiplashed. I'm like, couldn't you have just left the chibis out for this episode? But yeah, it's similar to what Mason said. I generally like Demon Slayer, but the second season just didn't do anything more with it. It just kind of felt one note.
Oh my God, you just brought so many memories flooding back. Because I remember I was watching that fight and I was like, not only is it so long, freaking like, I forgot his name. How did I forget his name? Tanjiro. he should have like been in a coma like 4 different times.
Oh,
like there's no way that one could keep fighting with the injuries that he had sustained. And it was just like, come on. Like I know it's a shonen. I know they're like untouchable, but like, come on.
But it's a similar problem with, like, power scaling. Like, you can't just keep like, your exhaustion levels are not infinite, you know? You gotta make it relative to the situation that you're in so that you don't tire people out that are watching it. It's kind of like when you're watching a person drown in a movie, like, you're gonna hold your breath with them, and you're gonna think like, "Okay, now I'm dead."
You want to know
So
why
and when you
the
have that
public voted so high? Big Boom Nezuko. Let's not dance around the issue. We all know that's what
I
it
mean,
is.
I am a major I hate fan service so much. I didn't think it was that bad for some reason
when
It
you brought
wasn't that bad. I'm just
because
when
it
making
wasn't
you
all that long.
when you brought up same body syndrome, I was like, man, you know, maybe they thought Nezuko handled it. She has like 20 different bodies as she goes, if you count the in between forms. Um, Russix, does their comments track with what the jury talked about?
Yeah, very much. So I think the biggest thing we all admitted, like, I'll start off by saying I'm actually a big fan of Demon Slayer personally. It's just that when you actually sit there and start talking about it and analyzing it, it's like you can't ignore the fact that it is very samey. It's like there's a very much a formula to Demon Slayer, and the Entertainment District arc definitely followed that same formula. And for a lot of people, that's going to work out just fine. Like a lot of people were perfectly happy with that formula. As a casual viewer, I personally love that formula. I'll watch it over and over again. I don't really care. Like that pure undistilled hype that comes with the show because it has Ufotable all behind it. It carries that excitement, and I can definitely see why the public would love it enough to have it in second, despite being very much the same. But yeah, all those comments more or less track. There was actually a big sticking point coming back because like when I originally watched it week to week, so like coming back to it nearly a year later, getting ready, judging all the different anime, and realizing like just how long it drags everything on was like pretty crazy. Because like when you watch it week to week, you don't notice it quite as much, I would say. But like I came back to it and I was like, oh man, it's like because all the other jurors were talking about it and I hadn't rewatched it yet, so I started rewatching it and I was like, okay, I see what they're all talking about now. This fight's taking forever.
Yeah, it feels
Yeah.
like a lot like
Inosuke in a kimono. Inosuke in a kimono just did not do enough.
it had those
This is
swole
true.
looking mice
Amazing.
though.
It's like the swole mice and Inosuke and a kimono were both personal highlights for me. So
It feels a lot like action movie syndrome just outside of anime even. You look at like Top Gun, a massive blockbuster movie. Audience goes there, it's hype, it's fun, they love it, it gets great scores, but critics inherently are looking at it through a different lens, a different scope, and it plays off the palette differently. It's not to say it's bad or wrong, it's just a different way of observation. And compared to, I mean, this has been a stacked category. All of these are very solid shows. It just,
Yeah.
yeah.
like
Well,
I was
here's
saying
a-
earlier, it's like we loved everything. So it's like I would say it's like specifically the top four was something that we mentioned. We haven't talked about two of them for the jury, but like they were all extremely close. It's like everybody in the jury, I think most of the jury loved Demon Slayer as well. It's just, it just couldn't hold to like an actual analytic look at it
Now,
compared to the
interesting
others.
that Jujutsu Kaisen 0 was higher on the jury side and lower on the public side, where, you know, there was probably more of a tonal shift in the Jujutsu Kaisen movie, but it really didn't expand the world or experience with a continuation in the same way that Demon Slayer did. So why did, I'm asking on the jury side, was that above Demon Slayer?
I would definitely go with it's like it wasn't expanding terribly far, but it did add a lot to its universe. It has
Mhm.
had a completely different cast of characters, but a lot of characters people love are still there, but they don't overstay their welcome. Like you know that we know where they're going, so they don't take too much time to dwell on them. Well, they'll also let some of those characters actually some of the characters that we already saw, we gotta see where they start out with.
Mm-hmm.
And we really enjoyed seeing the protagonist's journey from point A to point B. He was a very good protagonist, Yuji. I think it was Yuji. I'm blanking on names there, but the main characters start going from like kind of a weak little kid getting thrust into this world of exorcism, with his curse, and just getting to the point where at the end he's kind of accepting of himself was a much better, less formulaic arc. I guess is like I wouldn't say it's like unformulaic. It's shown in. It's like to some degree it's what you expect,
Hmm.
but it's like I wouldn't say it was the same as when you watch season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen. You're not getting that exact same experience because the difference between the protagonist of Zero and the protagonist of the actual show couldn't be more understated. They're completely different people.
And it's interesting because it's based on the manga that was still like in the stage of primordial goop that Jujutsu Kaisen would go on to evolve from. But do you think it being a movie hurt it in the rankings? Just by it's not as easily accessible to the wider populace. Both it and the Mobile Suit Gundam being movies, you think that hurts it in the public vote?
I definitely think that hurt Kaizen a little bit. I
Mhm.
also think it was slightly less popular than some of the other. I think there's only one thing I'm more surprised to see above it from the public side, that being 86. But even 86 is a more recent entry and it was a show, so it makes some sense. But yeah, I would definitely say films are a harder barrier to entry because, like, if you, like in my case, I don't get to see the, I don't always get to see things in theaters. So it's like when I do actually get to see things in theaters, it's kind of a special experience. So I can definitely see like, hey, I haven't seen this film, I can't vote for it. It's like that's a fair vote for from anybody's point of view.
To go back to what some of what Mason said earlier, I actually kind of disagree with his assumption that Jujutsu Kaisen Zero doesn't really add anything because it's not as equal. Because I mean, it makes sense from a certain point because obviously, like, it can't be consequential because it already happened, right? But from what I've heard and from what I've seen in other categories, there's like kind of a lot of setup stuff in Jujutsu Kaisen Zero that may or may not come to fruition in the later series of stuff that's not been adapted yet, which I think is maybe an interesting take to look at.
Yeah, I guess I should have rephrased it better. It's not so much a lack of world building, but lack of continuation in the lore of the main cast we know and grew to love. I feel like a lot of people might have been coming into Zero expecting, oh, I want to see the boys and girls that I watched all of season 1 for. And you get presented a different cast and maybe didn't connect with it.
I mean, there some of them are like what was the one girl, the hot girl with the glasses and the ponytail. Yeah, she's
Like,
in there.
a lot of
They-
the cast is actually still there. It's just that main trio is not here yet because this is the year before them, essentially.
Exactly.
It's just the way that I look at it. I look at it almost like I mean, and this is maybe a hard comparison to make because not everyone will know, but the Monogatari series, right? So Baki Monogatari, and then after Baki comes Kizu, which is a prequel, but it does this weird thing where all of the context that it provides enhances your experience of Bake again. You can watch Bake again, knowing all this extra stuff that you knew from the prequel, and get a new expanded experience of the same characters that you know and love.
Yeah,
I
I
think
guess
that's
I'm
where I
not.
was kind of trying. Oh,
No, go for it.
yeah, I think that was kind of what I was trying to get at earlier. Is like we see all the same characters. Like we know where they're going to be in there. It's like so the characters that aren't, where the story wasn't focused on, they're there, but you know where they're going, so they're in the background. They don't dwell too much. But there are certainly other characters where like you get some good background information for things that are probably still set to come. Like we see Gojo, but he's back. Everybody loves him. It's like we see one of the villains that was kind of in the background of season 1. We kind of get some backstory on him as well. So it's like there are things that are setting up for future seasons, and it's even kind of hinted at that the main character is going to come back in future seasons as well. So
Now, just to pivot real quick and just to go kind of a out there question, Caroline, when you're evaluating an action series, what exactly do you look for? How do you when you look at all these? How do you compare them? Because like they all share some similarities, of course, but they can also be so different as well. Do you look at characters, plot line, mostly visual quality? What's your approach here?
Well, I think I'm an all-rounder type. If it's an action show, of course, I'm expecting good action. But even if it doesn't have like all the bells and whistles, I I place a lot of value in, characters, their dynamics, the dialogue, um, and if it has like that really cool animation like Mob Psycho has, it just becomes like that's what I'm looking for. That's why I place Mob Psycho as high as I do above Chainsaw Man, because while I did enjoy Chainsaw Man and I thought the action was very unique, I don't connect with the characters as much as I do to a fraction that I do with Mob Psycho characters.
It's all about that Sakuga. That's what you want, right?
Sakuga does play a big role in that, because one thing that we kind of bring up on our podcast, somewhat regularly, is that I'll call him out, Mitsugi, our co-host. He thinks that it's kind of silly, like, oh, just because a show looks good, why do people love this show so much? It just looks good and nothing else. I disagree with that a little bit too, because if it looks good, then it's an experience. It has that animation quality that like you don't get in many places. So if you like a show just for the animation quality, then like hell yeah, love that show. Give your eyes a feast. Me personally, I love giving my eyes a feast, but I also need to have the character dynamics high up there as well.
I mean, now that you mention it, what I don't know. So, like, how do I word this? So, growing up, right? I should not. I should not assume everyone has the same experience. When I was growing up, a lot of the anime I was first exposed to were kind of your by the by shonen, right? So, big three: Naruto, Bleach, Dragon Ball Z, One Piece, all that, right? And if you take a look at the shonen kind of formula, because they have a formula, right? So where am I going with this?
Say it undelicately. Say it with your chest.
What I want to say is that most of these shows are shonen, right? Shonen in the definition of they appear in like a shonen magazine, right? But when you think of a shonen, when you think of something like Naruto or Bleach, right? You think of like cool people with cool powers, and they say some kind of activation word like "sing sword," and it like shoots a fucking melody sign or something. But if you take a look at some of these other shonen that have placed very high in this category, they all rebuke that formula in some way, right? So like Mob Psycho, obvious shonen, obvious action show, but it's not like I fight spirits with cool powers like the Gray Man. It's something more. It's something different. Chainsaw Man. Chainsaw Man is somewhat similar in that everyone has cool powers, like Kon, whatever. But it's set in this kind of like desolate, late stage capitalism style of setting that we don't normally see. Rather than just like a high school kid goes to some fantasy world a la Inuyasha, right? I don't know if that rambling made any sense, but that's what I'm feeling more and more as I get older. I'm valuing the more unique approach to something like a shonen rather than the kind of formulaic thing that I've been used to when I was a kid.
That's fair.
You like the eschewing of tradition that sees the formula, still plays by the rules, but puts its own spin on it to make it fresh. And I've often talked about that newness, a ability to watch something and be like, wow, I haven't had that experience before, is valuable, not only as a viewer and growing as a person, but a lot of times anime, I mean, you look at the gauntlet of isekai that have come out that feel so stagnant and rudimentary because they're all just copying the book. Anything that feels fresh should be awarded and applauded, and most of the shows you get here are because of that. I mean, even Bleach, a long-running show, is getting the love it is because it has taken a step back and re-examined and refreshed what it is that made it great, and not just been drudged up to be monetized. It is its own thing, and it has grown to be what I think fans have wanted for so long, which is why it's ranked so high on both sides.
Rustix, how much did uniqueness play a role in your determining your rankings?
Uniqueness wasn't really a large topic for us in terms of ranking anything, but I think that's just largely because the uniqueness of each series is going to stand out when you start kind of examining what it's doing. Kind of going back to like how we noted that Demon Slayer is kind of formulaic. It's like similar to season one. One says like when we're discussing things, those things that are unique kind of come out as we're discussing them. So I do think they played a part, but I don't think we ever looked at it as a specific topic of this is super unique. Outside of I think us pointing out that Denji was a very unique protagonist in that he's not like some kid with a grand adventure to become Hokage Pirate King or anything like that. He has
He
a very
just
grounded to earth goal.
he
I think
just
that was
wants
the most
money and the wholesome titties. Like, that's
yeah.
pretty.
But he grows in very atypical ways. Every pursuit of his goals, when they're rudimentary and childish, the pursuit of breasts, for example, is always met with resistance. He's never rewarded for his juvenile behavior. He gets barfed into, he gets slapped around. He
God.
grows in ways that most characters don't, and I find that to be refreshing and engaging, if a little disgusting.
Yeah.
But
It's
one
like-
thing I think... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Very good. All right.
Yeah,
So,
I
yeah,
was
it's
going
like-
to make a pivot, so go for it.
Okay. But yeah, I was like, that was like the only real point that came up as like a unique thing. 'Cause, like we do I would say is like technically those who have seen Bleach know that Ichigo's goal wasn't ever really particularly high. But in the case of almost all of these, is like we don't have those typical I'm gonna be basically the number one in my profession kind of styles. Like none of the characters have that motivation. They all have very specific motivations. JoJo's like Jolene just wants to get out of prison essentially. It reconcile with Jotaro. 86, they're just trying to do their best to survive essentially. It's a demon slayer, avenge his family. It's like even in Mobile Suit Gundam's like there's no because it's a specific episode being expanded on. Says like the main goals of the characters are very grounded into the plot of that episode, that movie. He says like there's no like grand narratives. Like all the characters feel like their motivations can be related to instead of because it's kind of hard to relate to. Like I mentioned like Hokage and Pirate King and all those classic ones. It's like those are like big grand goals for these long narratives, but those are hard to really latch onto. It's like you're latching onto the character, not their goal. Whereas all these characters, we can latch onto their goals in some way.
You brought up 86, which I'm actually not surprised it did so well on the public side. It was ranked number 2 last year with part 1. And do you think it being the only light novel of the batch gives it an advantage or a disadvantage, being that the directors and storyboarders don't have to adhere to the same, manga paneling setup, or does that give them, does it give them more freedom with how they present, or less in that they don't have a playbook in the same sense?
I think it's a bit of a mixture because I think 86, particularly in this season, had some of the most cinematic moments in the category, and there's a lot of scenes that immediately come to mind when I think of 86, like which scenes were great. But I also think it kind of suffered from an issue that some light novels have, where it's like they have these long dialogues, heavy sections, and because of that, it's like there's no panels to copy off of a manga, but it's like we see these characters sitting there essentially talking for a while. It's like, and 86 isn't as bad as a lot of our light novels are in that regard. Unfortunately, they do a fairly good job, but I do think there's some pros and cons to each. I definitely agree that there's pros and cons, and I think that freedom let them have those really beautiful cinematic moments because they didn't have to take from everybody. They could just read the scene, and be like, okay, this is what we want to do, and they could add their own little flair to it, essentially.
And it's cheating if you're allowed to put a Sawano soundtrack onto anything.
Basically, yeah.
It's just give people a chance.
All right. One last thing, real quickly. This is just always interesting to ask. Russix, how does this ranking compare to your own personal ranking? Are you happy with the result you have generated? Does it match with what you were coming into the awards expecting? And also, coming into the awards, were you kind of blindsided by one of these that maybe you were like, oh, I hadn't even heard of this, but I'm really glad I watched it for the awards?
Mobile Suit Gundam was actually the only one I hadn't watched prior. It's like when I joined the action category, it was like I was super excited because like there were so many shows. Like I watched this one, I watched this one, I watched this one. I loved all of them. So there was a lot of excitement for me joining the category. And then one of the jurors was like, "Hey, there's this Gundam movie." And then we all watched it like pretty close to like the cutoff too, and we all like, "Holy shit, why didn't we watch this earlier?" So it's like that was like a nice little surprise. I think for the entire jury was the Gundam film was really good. It's like when while you see his rankings, it wasn't good enough to like overtake anything else. We were all pretty happy we managed to get it into the category because we felt like it deserved some recognition to be viewed. In terms of,
go ahead, keep going.
in terms of my personal rankings, the number one is basically the same. Like Chainsaw Man was what I was when I went to the category. That was what I thought was going to be it. During discussions, is what I still felt like it was going to be while I talked to other people. There was some resistance. Some people thought Mob, and like fairly so. Oh, and I think the only show I like had some desire to rank higher was Bleach personally, because I am a big Bleach fan. But I couldn't. By the end of this, I couldn't argue against it. Like the points for Mob were higher than Bleach in terms of this. But going into the category, I definitely thought I was going to rank Bleach second until I started talking to other jurors.
Well, and I think what you mentioned about really experiencing Mobile Suit Gundam and really enjoying it and coming out of the blue, and it's still ranking 8th, just goes to show that it's a really competitive year, and you would not go wrong with any of these 8 entries. I think none of you would disagree with that.
That's correct.
A lot of good stuff in this category.
Well, I think that's a good place to end it. Thank you guys so much for stopping by and talking with me.
Well,
Thanks so much for having us.
We love talking, so make us talk anytime.
Yeah, and you can hear them talk over at the AAA podcast, not the auto company, but at aaapodcast.com, and pretty much on every streaming service, I believe.
That's correct.
Yeah. And thanks again to our juror Russix as well. You gave us a lot of insight.
Thank you for having me.
All right, on to the next category. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
See ya.